All right, so in our last video of the chapter, we are going to look at Japanese culture in particular. But first, we're going to discuss the role of women. The role of women in Japan, somewhat similar to what you saw in China. This is a male-dominated society where the husbands and the fathers run the household and are in charge of major decisions. You do hear stories from very early in Japanese history of female warriors, of female samurai. They might be legend, they might be true, or a mix of both. We do know that samurai women, right, the wives, daughters of samurai, were at times taught basic combat skills, particularly before the Tokugawa shogunate when everything was peaceful, just in case your home or your compound, your castle got raided while the husband was away, you could defend yourself. But as I said, it was a very male dominated society, as you saw in China. Right? Now, with Tokugawa culture, right, Japan, like China, was a very, very literate society. Right? And Japan is famous for a particular kind of poetry called the haiku, usually 3 lines, 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second line, 5 syllables in the last line. Often deal with nature or are capturing brief moments in time. And probably the most famous of the Japanese poets is a guy named Matsuo Basho. And now, sometimes the haiku is something that's lost in translation. Remember, you're going from Japanese into English, right? Sometimes you lose a little something in translation. But you look at some of these haikus by Matsuo Basho, well, a lot of them you can still get the gist of it, how they're trying to capture a single brief moment, like that first one on the screen there. None is traveling here along this way, but I this autumn evening. Or this is one of his most famous ones, which to me is a bit odd. An old pond, a frog jumps in, splash. Yeah, something is lost a little bit in the English on that one. But if you go further down, lightning, heron's cry, stabs the darkness. That's a pretty cool moment in time. Or this one at the bottom of the screen, poverty's child, he starts to grind the rice and gazes at the moon. You can just picture in your head, right, the child of a peasant farmer working late into the night at the threshing floor, grinding the rice and looking up at the moon. The thing about how difficult it is to capture a brief moment in time and capture the emotions of that time in only 3 lines with a limited number of words and syllables. It's actually pretty impressive once you stop and think about it. It's actually very difficult to do and to do well. It's really easy to write a bad haiku. It's really hard to write an excellent haiku. Right? It's kind of like a punk band. It's easy to start a horrible punk band. It's really hard to start a punk band that sounds really good. Right? So now we come to one of my favorite aspects of Japanese culture. I just love the story behind it. Kabuki theater, right? Remember, Japanese society is very rigid, right? And there had been this traditional Japanese theater called Noh drama, Noh, No, right? And it was very proper and it was very historical and it was for the warrior class, right? The merchants, the commoners, they weren't allowed to go. So at some point, and the history of this is a little murky, but at some point, inspired by traditional Japanese puppet plays called bunraku, right? The merchant class and the commoners started to perform these plays called kabuki. Probably the best translation of that word is the art of song and dance. Right? And so they start performing their plays meant for them because they couldn't go to the no drama, right? So they just came up with their own kind of theater, the kabuki theater. Eventually, it got so popular that sometimes even members of the warrior class, like the samurai, would go to the kabuki instead of the no drama, kind of on the down low, right? And kabuki theater is usually based on famous Japanese legends, sometimes based on no plays, sometimes based on those plays from puppet theater that I talked about, the bunraku. They are famous for their very elaborate and outlandish costumes and elaborate facial makeup, right? And they were starting to become super popular. The kabuki plays were, and those in charge of the government didn't like it because the ones in charge are warriors, right? And this is for the merchants, and the merchants are liking it, and it's becoming a huge success, and they don't really like it. Plus, some of the early kabuki theaters were also fronts for other illegal activity, right? So the Japanese government felt that kabuki is corrupting the morals of the Japanese people. It's also probably a little jealousy there because kabuki was becoming super duper popular, right? So the Japanese government made it a law that only men can perform in kabuki plays. No women were allowed because some of those early kabuki actresses also were involved in other illegal activities. So the thought was, well, we'll just ban women from the kabuki plays and the plays themselves will die. Well, at that point, the plays are so popular, right? The show must go on. So the owners of the kabuki theaters went, fine, if women can't perform the female roles, then we'll just have men perform the female roles. And stop what you're thinking right now, because it has nothing to do with sexuality whatsoever at all. It's just someone performing a role. Like if someone performed the role of a tree, they obviously they're not really a tree, they're just performing a role. And remember, in ancient Greece, men played all the parts. When Shakespeare's plays were first performed, all the parts were played by men. So this isn't exactly that rare, right? That's this idea that all the parts would be played by men, right? So the picture on the screen, right, this is a female character played by a man that has nothing to do with sexuality. In fact, kabuki is usually passed down father to son. So some modern day kabuki actors, they're seventh and eighth and ninth generation kabuki actors, right? They learn from their father, who learned from their father, who learned from their father, who learned from their father, so on and so forth, right? And these plays are fascinating to watch. Now, oftentimes, if you're a Westerner like me and you start watching it, you're like, I don't know what's going on. Because these are based on Japanese plays and legends that everyone in that culture knows about, right? But it's very similar to in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, in their plays, there would usually be a choir that would be like narrating what's going on, and that's what you see in Kabuki. The actors usually don't speak; they're involved in the dancing part of it, and it's the musicians and the choir, and the singers that provide the background and provide the narration. So if you look in the description of this video, I'm going to put some links to various kabuki plays so you can see them and you can hear them, you can watch them, you can see the exaggerated dances and the exaggerated poses. Well, in fact, I'll go ahead and put one on here. Now, you won't be able to get the sound with it, right? But you can see the exaggerated movements that take place with it. And you can see the musicians in the background, right? And at times they will sing and provide the narration. You see the elaborate costumes and the exaggerated dances and movements, right? So from a Western perspective at first, this is really weird. But you just kind of go with it, and you kind of just watch it, and you kind of just sit back and enjoy it, and it's actually pretty neat. Even if you don't always know exactly what's going on, it's pretty cool, right? And remember, this was started basically because of class warfare. The merchants, the commoners, they're not allowed to go to the no drama. So they're like, well, forget you, we'll make our own plays then on our own. Thus is born Kabuki theater. So this was really meant for the regular people, right? In fact, sometimes in the kabuki plays, right, the crowds would divide up almost like in teams and support their favorite actors, right? And when they would first come on stage, and they would yell and cheer and sometimes make signs, right? So kabuki, when it was first created, was a very loud, raucous affair, whereas the no drama for the warrior class, very prim and very proper, right? And so you went to kabuki to let loose and have a lot of fun. Of course, now, today, centuries later, now if you go to a kabuki play, now it's very prim and it's very proper because now it's tradition. And in Japan, there's no longer a law that says a woman can't be in a kabuki play, but now it's tradition, right? So men still play all the parts in kabuki theater.